Welcome to our time of review this week as we seek to solidify our reading and to put it back into its story arc. I saw this this clever cartoon this last week. It was two buzzards flying over the desert, and on their knees crawling in the sand below the buzzards were two men, one obviously a pauper and the other one a king with a crown on his head. And so one buzzard said to the other, "Don't be impressed with the one who has a crown on his head. They both taste the same." So what you really see in the Bible is you see a contrast in our reading this last week between two types of people. And Jesus mentions these two types of people and gives a warning: enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who go by it. And he talks about the other gate because narrow is the gate, difficult is the way that leads to life, and those are few who find it. So he demonstrates two types of gates: the broad gate, the narrow gate, two types of ways that follow each of those gates. The narrow gate is hard, it's difficult, and so on, and there are only few who go down that road. Well, you have the broad gate and so on. But what I see in the reading this last week that helps us put it back into the story narrative is this. In the beginning of the story, you have two types of people. You have Cain, who lives outside of the presence of God, he and his descendants, and their culture is characterized by all kinds of sin, including polygamy and so on. It is not a safe place for anyone. And then you have the other way, lined up in the descendants of Seth. These people call upon the name of the Lord. And it's only as the two begin to intermarry do you see that the whole world is filled with corruption, where every thought and intent of the heart is only evil continually. And so as we look at the Gospels, what we see is also two types of people. We see the narrow gate people. These are people who see and understand that they have a legit need, that they are broken people. And so when they encounter Jesus, well, they submit to him, they come to him and recognize their great need and receive from him. Well, you have the broad gate, the Broadway people, but they don't think that they're the broad gate people. They actually think they're the narrow gate people. But these are the religionists. These are people who got it all together on the outside, that they, from all appearances, they're righteous people if you measured righteousness by external performance. But what Jesus does, especially in our reading this last week, he goes to the dashboard of the heart. He exposes the motives of a person's heart through the blessings of the Beatitude. And he talks about being one of poverty of spirit, one who mourns, the person who's meek, the ones who hunger after hunger and thirst after righteousness, the merciful people, the pure in heart. These people make peace. And so he unpacks that, letting us know a little bit about what is the state of the heart, who know that they have a need and come to Jesus in the midst of that need. It's very internally driven. Yes, they do have outside needs, and Jesus, doesn't avoid meeting them where they are outside, blind and naked and haven't experienced great loss or great brokenness. He does minister to them. But in contrast, what you have is the religious people in the Beatitudes. You have Jesus exposing the dashboard of their own heart, because they're looking and saying, well, we don't commit murder. But he says, no, murder is not just an external act, that it is anger out of control. They said, well, we don't commit adultery. And Jesus is saying, no, it's not just an external outside action. It has to do with your heart. If you lust after a woman, you are committing adultery. He talks about divorce because they would put away their wives, and it sounds righteous that you're putting away an unrighteous person because of their immorality or their moral infidelity. And what Jesus is saying here, no, divorce is more than just marital separation. It's exposure of a heart attitude. It's a violation of covenant. Not only that, he talks about the swearing. Well, we don't swear on this and we don't swear on that. But Jesus is saying, no, any swearing that you make, including on the temple and so on, is assuming that you have power that you don't really have. He talks about prayer and love, and he talks about how that they said, well, that we love our neighbor, but he's saying, no, loving a neighbor is not taking revenge. And so love and prayer for your enemy or your neighbor is taking the moral high road. Talking about charity, he exposes charity is not an outward show in the same way he did with prayer, because they would give an outward show of pretended righteousness, because everything they did was for showmanship, was for public fodder. So you see this. He talks about unforgiveness for these people as well, because you can be very religious and be an unforgiving person. Paul actually characterizes unforgiveness as one who has a debased mind. And so what you see here is what Christ is doing is he's addressing the internal heart attitudes of people who have a narrow gate and a broad gate entry, and a broad way and a narrow way path that leads to different ends, one to destruction and one to everlasting life. And so what the reading does this week, it begs us to consider the gate in which we've entered. It begs us to consider the path that we're on, and it gives us characteristics of both so that we can inspect our lives and come to the same conclusion of those who are poverty of spirit, that they have needs and they know Jesus will meet those needs.